can we go back to where we left off last time, just to fill in something which I forgot and I thought it was important?
That sounds very good.
Where we said that the technique was now replacing the object after Cubism. And Mondrian was the one who continued with the technique, and he said, the surface of things give joy, but their inwardness gives life. Of course, I like that very much. And then I forgot to mention the futurists. You remember I went to find answers for my questions and to find a role model or something that could become a role model, and I found nothing. The last option was the futurists. It was Valla, Boccione, and Severini who did the best work, and Marinetti wrote their manifesto, and it was a declaration of war. It had to be movement and motion. So, of course, it was really what I was looking for. And, well, they then had his manifesto. They were looking for spatial dynamism. And they did some good pictures. And there's something that Sefo wrote in the 62 book, which I discovered only after 2018. But I thought it was so interesting. If you don't mind, I'll read it to you quickly. He said, to say the least, it is hazardous, a hazardous undertaking to try to introduce movement into painting. And yet, this is just what they did. So then later on he said, it is another case of artistic wisdom arrived at by great daring. And this is exactly what it was. But then they also were rather too attached to the model. There was 3 pictures that I only saw the reproductions of, so I'm really only speaking of reproductions, were still close to the thing. The thingness is such a difficult thing to leave off in painting, but that is what the Cubists did to it. So that is just that little bit I wanted to add, because I thought it helps to make it a little bit clearer.
I think the words, another case of artistic wisdom arrived at by great daring.
Daring, he said, yeah.
But that applies to you.
Oh, yes. The whole thing was just searching, acting, daring, and doing. That so it had to continue. But you know they were the best example in those days, also to my colleagues there, these scientists, because they were dedicated people and they showed us how to work and just give your best. And that was a wonderful atmosphere to work in, because we were still close to all those big inventions that they did. And of course, the fact that I had many writer friends in those days, not so many, but writer friends, and they were into those things too. And you know, it just works together.
But if you think about it now, if you South Africa also needed the futurists. They were trying to break from the legacy of Italy's long tradition of classic painting and everything. Yeah. I mean, a lot were of Italian origin, as you said earlier. But it's sort of, Africa was very much at that stage also trapped still in realism and sort of and maybe impressionism, Cape Impressionism and everything. I remember a story then when Pinioff did his first exhibition where he tried to do these more abstract works, that he only sold 1 work on the entire exhibition. And, yes, you know, out of 30 works, and people just resisted the move away from either sort of realism based, even if it's expressionism, there's still a real picture and a real object that is just reinterpreted. So I assume also the works that you've done where you went very abstract must have been quite a strong departure from obviously what people were used to in South Africa.
Well, you see, in this morning's, we talk now about coming back to South Africa and into this. Well, people thought, what was it really? What is going on? I mean, it was so foreign. Just the word abstract was not generally used, but people looked and they didn't like it, which is understandable. I can show you some things that were seen on my first exhibition. I still have a few, but let me show you some of the drawings that were on the first exhibition.
Fantastic.
You see, I was always interested in light sources, and I started with lanterns, storm lanterns, and I did quite a few of them. Now, after Cubism, of course, when technique started to matter so much, everything in the picture had its place, its meaning, and it was important. You couldn't have a corner that was sort of less important. So the whites, the darks, the directions, the curves, the straights, everything had to be accounted for. So it was just one long search. There are 3 here. They're all same thing, but all pretty different.
Of the 3 that you've just showed, the middle one I find particularly striking.
This one?
Yes.
Yeah, they're very beautiful.
Yes, because it's all the time the circle and the square, isn't it? And yet one grows to love them. and this also was on that exhibition.
In South Africa at the Litchi Gallery, yes.
At the Litchi Gallery. Oh, yeah, you know it so well. Yeah. And this one too, my table and chair. And I later painted this in oil for the Sao Paulo Biennale. And this is, yeah, I mean, you can't blame people for saying, what the heck is that? Because if you look for a what, you have a problem. Okay.
What did it do to your morale, if I may ask? This is perhaps not a direct art-related question, but it still goes to the heart of the matter. We've just talked about how daring you were.
We were so young and we just thought, we're just doing our thing and we show it. And we hope people would like it and would look at it at least. Later on, it became more and more difficult. Then one really wanted to get some return. You see, I always had good crits. The newspapers were always kind and was good. But then you have an exhibition and nothing sells. Now, galleries aren't much interested in that because they must also make a living. So I have quite interesting lots of press cuttings, thick one. I was very happy with them, but that's where it stopped. So this is another one that was on that first Litchi show. It's, you know, it's from that very nice Gauguin painting. I think Elsa also showed a bit of it in her talk. Yes. And there was another painting. It was called The Yellow Nude. That was in these colors, and it was quite a big painting about this square, and that was a major part of the show. That sold straight away. That was amazing. For 50, by the way, guineas, and we all priced our pictures in guineas because the guinea is what, £1 and 1 shilling. And that adds to your income, and it was 50 guineas for that picture. That was amazing.
So it was quite an achievement. That seems like quite a price for the time. It was. Do you know who purchased it?
Yes, I remember. It was. I think I can say it now. It was Mrs. Press from one of the big clothing shops. And later on, I got to know her sister-in-law very well. And they were in Edgar's. Lovely people, very nice people.
Collectors, they built this incredible building there in near that hospital. That's where we are at the flat, in sort of on the border of Hillbrow and Parktown.
Oh, yes.
The presses built almost a New York style brownstone 4-story apartment with the thing where that thing, which was really, really very, very beautifully designed and yeah, very sophisticated. So that was a good collector to have early on now.
I'm glad to hear that. I didn't know that. Yeah, lovely. Can I just go back to a little something? This picture, I dug it out of a trunk with many other old things. This was done before I went to France. I mean, you couldn't expect me painting that after I'd looked at Gauguin, this thing. But look at, I only saw it when I dug it out about, well, not a year ago. Look at this going into the background. So it must have been there, but I didn't know it. I was so surprised when I saw it the other day. Always I had these things of cutting the corners a bit, but that was quite new to me.
It's really a striking painting. It's powerful.
You know, this, I think this one, this is just a little...
How old were you then when you did that?
This I bought at Zimbabwe, the Victoria Falls. And this little thing accompanied me. I often painted it because I liked it so much. It was just this small little piece. And I could never stop drawing it. And then there were the boat shows, the boats.
Oh, yes. That reminds me very much of Mondrian.
Yes, yes, it is so. It is so. Yeah. But then, you know, he somehow but he didn't use the curve. So
That's beautiful.
I was doing a lot on the fruit, and I needed the curves, and of course the human body. Now, we're really making quite an exhibition here today. This one was on that first show. And this is the picture I had in mind when I said to you the other day that when the object was broken half open, so that parts of it were more important than other parts, what was in background or space in real life could come in. And by the way, this picture my father bought on my first show, so that's why I still have it. Okay.
Oh, fantastic.
See, just the beginning of trying to find the remains of the object. They must eventually become proper signs, and the struggle one has to get there.
There is you mentioned the word flow when in the previous session, and
Yes.
that is almost the first word that springs to mind when I see this painting.
You're quite right. I think it is the beginning of flow. But it's an unclear flow now.
I'd say position of the planes stacked.
Yeah.
As well, which a bit, I think, which also you found that Braque did often, was to break up the planes in different, to give it almost a sense of movement and a sense of different perspectives, which is beautifully brought together here in this work, I think.
Yes, while working on this motion thing, I found there are basically two ways that you get it. And many people like Kupka, he was also a cubist, he also did that, and he stopped there. And I also found how automatically did it in my early still lifes of bottles. It is this, I call it repercussion, just one after the other, quick. I've forgotten now what I've called it myself. And after that, I was looking for this flow, and that took a long time. Because still to have some sort of definition of the flow, not to have an haphazard flow. Oh, what a thing. So then we started with exhibitions here, and I used to usually take them to Pretoria, to the Association of Arts Gallery, mostly. And whatever happened in Johannesburg, I took to Pretoria. And that was in the 50s and the very early 60s, showed there once together with Gunther van der Reis. And later on, Gunther and I worked lots together on the Sasol collection and, yeah, mainly the Sasol collection. It was a matter of exhibitions at galleries. Lichi was the one, I had several there. Lots and lots of group shows, usually represented on all of it. And until 64, when I had to take over from the Johannesburg Art Gallery from Dr. Hendricks, I exhibited freely. But after 64, I felt now I must be careful, and I was so afraid not to mix the museum with my private painting. And actually that was to my detriment, but it doesn't matter, it's done, and I felt happy with it that way, because they were two sides of being. And each one had something very valuable for me at the time. Because the discipline that I learned from Anton Hendricks at the Johannesburg Art Gallery was just beautiful. It was a very sort of intellectual discipline. You know, if you don't know a thing, you say, I don't know it, story finished. You don't sort of and ha and all that. And then somehow all my shows were mainly at museums. In those days, when I now was responsible for the museum, it was shown at Potchefstroom and at the Waldriehoek and all the places like that. Also in Bloemfontein, in 1985, they put that exhibition together, the travel to Cape Town and to Pretoria and then again to Potchefstroom. So it was mainly museums. Also with Larry Scully, later on in Stellenbosch, he invited us for a group show and then again for me personally, and so it went on. So mostly it was that. And then I really had only 2 dealers in South Africa. Because when I left the museum, there was this one exhibition at Goodman Gallery. Linda was very keen, it was going to be great. The opening was fantastic. Lots of people came because, you know, they're from the museum also. But Linda left the next morning on a European tour, or American, I don't remember which, and she left me with her assistant, who was a kind man, but he was not a businessman. And only the Johannesburg Art Gallery bought one thing, and Esme Berman bought another one, and that was it. And the comments of people were very interesting, but that we'll talk about later. Then I had nobody. But Reinhold Kassera said to me, how about coming to me? I'm starting a gallery. And he was having fun and enjoyed it so much. For 10 years, he had the gallery in Rosebank, Kassera Fine.
Rosebank.
Reinhold Kassera, yeah.
In Rosebank.
And there was one exhibition that was one of my best. I haven't got one reproduction of it. It was, I think it was my best show ever. They were marks and color shapes and color planes. So it was actually it was a lovely combination of these black marks and color planes. But I have nothing of it. He sold the entire show. That's the first time it ever happened. For 10 years we worked together, and every time I think we had 6, 7 or 8 shows, I don't remember. When he stopped, he said to me, I can no longer go on because, you know, one needs to be very exact if you want to go on with it. So then for 15 or 17 years, I was at sea again. And then David came to Johannesburg in 27. Yeah, that was 27. And then I remained with him. And he didn't do badly at all either. But more varied it was. Because I always say he is a matcher of pictures and people. When he looked at the thing here, I said to him, "Why are you so quiet? Say something." Then he would say, "I'm just thinking who is going to just love this picture? Who is going to match that one?" and so on. So he was really always matching people and pictures.
But now, just interesting, you did have two exhibitions. After you went to South Africa, you did have some exhibitions back in France again, back in Paris.
Oh, yes, that's...
I mean, in 1955, you were in Galerie Rebroff, and then and also at the Salon with a lot of other artists, the Salon de Réalité Nouvelle, I think. So that must have been quite an experience as well, I think.
Oh, that is what Sefor also was very interested in. And that, of course, gave me a big moral boost to continue. When I got to the Johannesburg Art Gallery, I was now also helping in the library. You know, we did everything there. We really worked a 6-day week. We really all worked very hard. And there in the library, I was so surprised to discover this little catalogue of the 10th Salon des Réalités Nouvelles. And I see Anton had made a cross against my name, so he had seen it. But I must tell you, to obtain that job was very, very difficult. For a year I worked at the SABC, yes, in order to make a living. And then during that year I had 3 big interviews with him. He wasn't going to waste his time on anybody that wasn't dedicated. And he asked me various questions. One was, "Why do you want to come here?" I said, "Because I want to learn something here, because I think I can." Well, I think that made him decide, okay, this is all right. So after a year, I could go there and work there. But then, of course, I was so happy when I walked into the 20th century room, which he had created. I saw my teachers from Paris. It was Saint-Gier, Manessier, Pignon. They were all showing at the Galerie de France. And we as students thought they were the best ones of the day. And here they were hanging on the gallery walls. You can imagine how wonderful that was. Yeah, so I was so pleased when I got that job and could then work, because the collection was lovely. In the meantime, he had bought glass as well for Cubism and Herbin.
But now, so you started with the Joburg Art Gallery in 1957, if I remember correctly.
57, it was just when Pirniev died. And we had all the Pirniev, files this big that I had to work through. And it took us, I think, 2 years. And Anton had a rubber stamp made, so we stamped the good drawings, and there were a few that he thought, no, that would damage his name, which we put aside for May to collect. It was about a job of 2 years. But it was very interesting, because at the end of the story, I got a very beautiful order drawing, because I had spent so much time on it, extra time and so on. And that order drawing I'll show you one day. It's a beautiful one of a woman in a hat. It's lovely.
If I may ask, during that time, let's say the 50s, 60s, 70s, which other South African artists, if any, did you did it inspired you, or did you have contact with, or that somehow had an influence on your name? I'm speaking on your work. I'm speaking specifically of visual artists.
You know that I've forgotten her name. She also appeared in the book that Sifo published. You know, he called it just abstract art. I cannot show you a picture of it now. It is in the book. I'll find it, but it will take a while. Cecil was very fortunate. He found his subject, which he actually continued through his life and worked at it and improved it and looked at various facets of it. And Larry was into abstract landscape, I think. I think I would call it landscape. And so they were happy. They were with those things. But they were not exploring many other things. So I was a bit alone.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yes, whereas you were continually trying to break the mold, no pun intended. You were never satisfied, as far as I can see, with once you achieved a certain goal, you went deeper and deeper and deeper.
I think so. You know, I used to say, oh, I must always empty the bucket till there's nothing left. but also this approach of finding the sort of the essence of things. It's just the approach. There are so many things. So I tackle the human body as the most important one. You see something like the pruning shears, it reminds you of a bird. You write into that and a whole series come out of it. Or you draw the first speeding horse and there you're into a new field. So you're one busy with the one and another one is knocking, because creation is so varied, and that approach applies to everything in creation. So it became a long journey.
I tried to look now to see on the internet what is the earliest paintings of yours I could see that's depicted, and the earlier ones, well, it's actually on your website, are from 1950. The one is called White Light and the other one is called Yellow Light. And light and lamps is a theme that you addressed in many times in your career, I think. But clearly in the beginning, you know, then I looked towards, you know, the chess pieces and glasses and objects and the violin and the cello and things like that. And then in the 70s, you moved into, and that was all sort of, say, very objective things, a glass, a lamp, a light, and then into the crucifixion series and into human bodies, and it became much more, it's almost more emotional, more personal, not so so an intellectual exercise as an emotional exercise in a way.
It is the emotional times of one's life. It was at that time, and that first time, you know, you land in certain relationships and you experience joy and you experience pain, and when you know the story. So that first one, all the crucifixions came out of it, because if you start looking into the shape, you see these corresponding lines, and because we are just vertically in two, and you have the two nipples of the breast, and there is the cross. I mean, you can't help it. Yes. So you catch it and you use it. And le néant, that means the emptiness. That picture in Stellenbosch was one of, I think, the major things, because I felt happy with that one. I thought it was okay.
The sort of formalism of Cubism and those sort of things are, for me, there's a very strong academic undertone to it. And it's a, you know, and then you move to something for me that had that still had that same academic undertone and discipline of abstraction, but it had a very much stronger emotional content to it. And that for me was almost a bridge to the works where you started working almost for me more with concepts than with with objects. And I mean, so the light that the lamp makes was more important than the lamp or its foreground or its background type thing. And the figures became much more abstracted, and the Ophelia's, I mean, it was all, for me, there was a new dimension to those works. It's almost like a new phase where you married the formalism almost with much more a personal journey in a way. Concepts became much more important. And, you know, we'll talk another day, but I was very fascinated how you went from there to those sort of dynamics with a little very abstract. And I mean, it was a big jump back to abstraction, and then it was very abstracted. And yeah, but anyway, just on those periods in the 60s, and when you, just for the early 70s, when it went to really abstract game, was very interesting. And it was interesting also for me going through your website to see that in, say, 1970, you painted you know, violin and a candle again in a slightly different thing. So it is nice to see that re-examination of the same sort of theme, but then obviously all the different periods in between.
Yes, you know, when you mentioned music a moment ago, I straight away thought, well, of course, those instruments were so fantastic. You have straight away the straights and the curves, and you could just go on with them, and particularly when they are being used, and you pick them up in the person using them, then it becomes a game in itself.
But Nell, you referred to the Sao Paulo Biennale in 1965. Do you remember what works, and have you got maybe one of the works that you actually presented at that Biennale?
I think Bailon Sandri has got that one, but it wasn't a very important work. It was just a small one like that, and that drawing was the drawing for the picture.
Bailon, that show of Bailon's had that beautiful Secretaire series, of which we showed at Welgemeente as well, and you have quite a few of the lamp and the light series that I'm trying to look at the website here quickly. And we had to chat about that before, and when you went back to the telephone, remember those series, those beautiful abstract books about the telephone and about the secretaires, which are also at the same time a bird. And especially, I mean, and some of the, there was sort of an animal-like quality to the telephone as well. It was abstracted to whether a claw or something moving. Tell us a little bit about that, that time series.
I've never been fond of the telephone. I had a German friend who was running the German National Tourist Office here, and she said to me, "This is my best toy." I said, "Oh, you can have the toy anytime," because somehow I was never comfortable on the telephone. So, and I had to use it, and I had calls that were pleasant and calls that were unpleasant. And I got so tired of the telephone that I thought, I will take it out on you. And that's how those pictures arose. And after they were done, I had finished with the telephone. Then I became better friends with the telephone.
From those days to these, if we just think of the technological shifts that have taken place, it is quite something, quite an achievement for you to sit in Johannesburg, in Melville, in your studio, and for us to sit in Cape Town today and to be able to have this extremely meaningful, valuable conversation. And I must say, you look so comfortable in this medium. So even though it's not a telephone, in a sense, it's the same technology, or there's that same distance perhaps between people, but at least there's a visual connection. And I must say, Nell, that you do this as if it were your medium from the start. You do it very naturally and very well.
Can I tell you, it all depends on the questions you ask. It's very important.
Well, that's a nice compliment then. Thank you.
Now, but maybe back to that time, from 1957 to 1966, you worked in the, you know, at the Joburg, at the gallery, and then in 1966 you became the director. Yeah. And I mean, obviously, I assume that's and I know from, and Helen will talk in more detail with you about that period. That must have been a very intense period. But how easy or difficult was it for you to be a performing artist while at the time also working full-time in an institution that in a very demanding capacity?
You see, up to 64, I was assistant, and all the responsibility was with Dr. Hendricks. So I just followed what he asked, what he needed, I assisted. So at night, I didn't have any duties to go here or to lunch or to supper or what have you. I could just paint every weekend and every evening if I wanted to, and that's what I did. And public holidays were big, big, big gifts. And also in the, I think it was in the later 50s, early 60s, I used a lot of gouache because it dries quickly. That was in the search for flow. So there, a whole lot of things were done in gouache. Time was very limited. But then after 64, it became more difficult. Then it's only when it was a very emotional need to get some things out on paper or canvas that I really went on into the night and didn't worry what time I would get up in the morning. But of course you had to be up because you had to be at the job, which was a good discipline, very good. Difficult, but good.